Honestly, what is she even doing in here? This is a Tier 1 briefing, not a secretarial pool. Could someone please get Ms. Reed a notepad and some coffee to fetch? We have actual work to do. The crowd of executives and senior analysts chuckled nervously, a ripple of sycophantic laughter that echoed the sterile acoustics of the 40th floor Strategic Operations Center. Evelyn Reed didn't flinch. Her gaze remained fixed on the primary communications console, her expression as placid as a frozen lake. She wore a simple, gray pantsuit that seemed designed to be forgotten, and her hair was tied back in a neat, efficient bun. There was nothing about her that demanded attention, which, in a room filled with egos forged in boardrooms and beltway battles, made her an immediate and invisible target. Chief of Staff Marcus Thorne, a man whose tailored suits were as loud as his opinions, gestured dismissively toward her with a gold fountain pen. He saw a middle-aged woman, quiet and unassuming, and his mind, a machine honed for snap judgments and political calculus, filed her away under irrelevant. He saw a placeholder, a fixture, a ghost in the corporate machine. But across the room, sequestered in a darkened observation annex behind one-way glass, a visiting four-star Marine general, a man who had seen ghosts of a different sort in the mountains of Kyunur and the deserts of Anbar, saw something else entirely. When the general saw her stance, feet shoulder-width apart, a subtle but perfect center of balance, a posture of relaxed readiness, a flicker of recognition, a ghost of a memory sparked in his mind. If you believe that true strength is found not in the volume of the voice but in the precision of the hands, type quiet professional below. The condescension from Thorne was a physical presence in the room, a thick, cloying fog of arrogance. He continued his pre-briefing tirade, using Evelyn as a convenient prop for his performance. Look, people, the entire point of this facility is to streamline decision-making. We need operators, thinkers, leaders. Every seat in this room costs this company $10,000 an hour, and I, for one, want to see a return on that investment. We're discussing the complete communications vulnerability of the Eastern Seaboard's power grid. This isn't a training exercise. This isn't a take-your-daughter-to-work day scenario. His eyes flicked back to Evelyn, who is now running a Level 3 diagnostic on the quantum entanglement communication relay, a piece of experimental technology no one else in the room truly understood. Her fingers moved across the holographic interface with a liquid grace, a dance of methodical purpose that was entirely lost on him. He interpreted her focus as insolence, her silence as ignorance. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice dripping with mock patience, "did you hear me? The adults are talking now. Your services, whatever they may be, are not required. Please go." The onlookers, a collection of VPs and department heads, shifted uncomfortably. They knew Thorne was a bully, but he was also their boss. Their silence was a form of complicity, a quiet vote in favor of the established hierarchy. Evelyn completed her diagnostic sequence. A series of green check marks cascaded down the screen. She didn't look at Thorne. She didn't acknowledge his existence. Her entire universe was contained within the silent hum of the server racks and the cool, blue light of the interface. This absolute lack of reaction was, to Thorne, the ultimate insult. It was a rejection of his authority, a denial of his very presence. He was about to escalate, to call security and have her physically removed, when a single, piercing alarm cut through the room. A crimson light bathed the walls. On the main tactical display, a map of the United States flickered and the entire eastern seaboard went dark. It wasn't a simulation. It was real. And in that moment of sudden, catastrophic failure, the carefully constructed world of titles and hierarchies and expensive suits began to crumble into dust. The room descended into a predictable, well-dressed chaos. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of panic and blame. "What happened? Give me the grid authority," one VP shouted into a dead satellite phone. "Where are the backups? Why aren't the generators kicking in?" Another demanded of a terrified-looking IT technician. Marcus Thorne, for all his bluster, was frozen. His authority, derived from a functioning system, had evaporated in an instant. He was just another man in a dark room, shouting useless orders into the void. The silence from Evelyn Reed, however, had transformed. It was no longer passive or invisible. It had become a tangible force, a center of gravity in the swirling vortex of panic. While others scrambled, she moved with an unnerving calm. Her steps were measured, her purpose clear. She went to a heavy lead-line locker in the corner of the room, a piece of equipment labeled Emergency Contingencies. Do not access. Thorn, snapping out of his stupor, saw her and barked. What do you think you're doing? That's classified military hardware. Evelyn ignored him. Her fingers danced over a biometric keypad. A soft click, and the heavy door swung open. Inside was not a set of manuals or emergency rations. It was a single, matte black Pelican case. She placed it on the central conference table and opened it. The contents silenced the few remaining shouts in the room. It was a hardened, military-grade satellite communications suite, a TACSAT terminal that looked alien amongst the sleek corporate technology. It was scuffed and worn, its edges bearing the scars of places far rougher than this boardroom. With the same methodical precision she had displayed on the console, she began to assemble it. Her hands were steady, practiced, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of thousands of hours of repetition. She didn't consult a manual. She didn't hesitate. Each cable clicked into place with a satisfying finality. Each component was seated with a firm, confident press. The act itself was a quiet refutation of everything Thorn had said. He had demanded operators, thinkers, leaders. In the dark, surrounded by the useless artifacts of their peacetime power, this silent, dismissed woman was the only one operating. The room watched, mesmerized as she worked. The emergency lighting cast long, dancing shadows, turning the state-of-the-art operations center into a primordial cave. The only sounds were the soft clicks of the equipment and the ragged breathing of the executives. Evelyn unspooled a thin, fibrous antenna cable and connected it to a small, directional dish. She placed a strange-looking device on the table, an on-block clip that converted digital signals to an analog format no one recognized. She powered the unit on, not from the building's dead grid, but from its own internal power cell. A low, steady hum filled the air, a sound of life in a dead room. She donned a lightweight headset, the kind worn by combat controllers and special operations teams, not corporate assistants. She bypassed the standard corporate network, routing her connection through a series of encrypted military satellites that didn't appear on any public registry. On a small, ruggedized screen, lines of code scrolled past, a language none of them could read. Then she began to speak. Her voice, when it finally came, was as calm and measured as her movements. It was devoid of panic, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of pure, unadulterated competence. Dagger Actual, this is Watchtower, she said, her voice a low, clear signal in the oppressive silence. Requesting priority handshake, authentication code 09er Tango Delta. I have a broken arrow scenario. Repeat, a broken arrow scenario. Civilian grid collapse. Continental Sector 1 Alpha. A beat of static. The executives stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning awe. Thorn's mouth hung slightly agape, the insult he had hurled just minutes before now tasting like ash. A voice crackled back through the headset, distorted but clear. Watechto ver? Dagger actual acknowledges. Authentication confirmed. We read you 5 by 5. Stand by for telemetry uplink. The impossible had happened. In a city of 8 million people that had just been plunged into technological darkness, this unassuming woman had opened a direct, secure line to the highest echelons of the United States military. The demonstration was over. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the shattering of 100 false assumptions. Thorn could only whisper a single, broken phrase. That's not possible. From the observation annex, General Wallace watched the scene unfold, a grim, satisfied smile touching his lips. He had seen this before, in situations far more dire. He recognized the call sign, Watchtower, wasn't just a name. It was a legend whispered in classified briefings, a designation for a very specific type of asset. A ghost. A problem solver deployed to situations that had gone so far off the rails that conventional forces couldn't even approach them. He turned to his aide, a young, decorated major. "Give me your file." "The real one." "Authorization code, Wallace Omega-7. The major's eyes widened slightly. Omega-7 was the general's personal command override, reserved for matters of national security. He tapped furiously on a secure tablet. As the data began to populate, the major's professional composure cracked, his jaw tightening in disbelief. The general didn't need to see the file. He already knew. He stepped out of the annex and into the main operations center. His presence was immediate and absolute. The VPs and analysts, who had been staring dumbfounded at Evelyn, snapped to a semblance of attention. The general's uniform, crisp and adorned with the quiet testament of a lifetime of service, seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He walked past the cowering Marcus Thorne without a glance, his focus entirely on the woman at the console. Evelyn looked up, saw him, and gave a short, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement before turning back to her work, relaying critical grid data to the military command that was now scrambling jets and deploying cyber warfare units based on her intel. The general stopped beside the table. He didn't speak to her. He spoke to the room, his voice a low rumble of authority that tolerated no argument. "For the last 10 minutes," he began, his eyes sweeping over the assembled executives, "you have been witness to a masterclass in competence. You have also been witness to a masterclass in ignorance." He looked directly at Thorne, his gaze as hard as granite. "You asked what Ms. Reed was doing here. A fair question, if you lack the perception to see what's right in front of you." The general gestured for his aide to bring the tablet forward. The screen glowed in the dim light. "Let's clarify her role for you, shall we?" he said, his voice laced with cold fury. He angled the screen so Thorne could see it, but he read the contents aloud for the benefit of everyone. His words fell like hammer blows, each one demolishing another brick in the fortress of Thorne's arrogance. "Name, Dr. Evelyn Reed." "That's Mr. Thorne. PhDs in cryptography and network engineering from MIT. Postdoctorate at DARPA." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "But that's just her cover. Her real resume is a little more kinetic." The general's finger swiped across the screen. "Unit classification, Joint Special Operations Command, Special Activities Division. A unit so secret, most of the Pentagon still thinks it's a myth. Primary occupational specialty, technical surveillance countermeasures, and in extremis communications." He looked up from the tablet, his eyes locking with Thorne's. "That means when a situation like this happens, when everything goes dark and the people in charge start panicking, we send her. She is the backup. She is the failsafe. The call sign Watchtower isn't a job title. It's a designation for the person who is dropped into the worst place on Earth to build a bridge back to the rest of us." He swiped the screen again. "Combat hours, classified. We stopped counting after 5,000. Medals, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 silver stars, a bronze star with valor, 5 purple hearts." He let that hang in the air. 5. Mission classifications. All Tier 1, Special Access Program, code word protected. She has operated alone in places your nightmares wouldn't dare to venture. He turned the tablet off. The room was utterly still. General Wallace then did something that no one in that room had ever seen a 4-star general do. He turned to Evelyn, who was now quietly coordinating drone reconnaissance of the city's primary power substations. He stood ramrod straight, brought his hand up in a sharp, perfect salute, and held it. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice now filled with a profound and unmistakable respect. "Mom, your command." The story of what happened on the 40th floor spread through the echelons of government and corporate power, not like wildfire, but like a ghost. It was a whispered tale, a piece of institutional folklore passed in hushed tones, in secured conference rooms, and over encrypted channels. It became known simply as the Watchtower incident. The name Marcus Thorne became a cautionary tale, a synonym for the kind of high-level arrogance that mistakes silence for weakness. He wasn't fired. That would have been too simple, too clean. Instead, he was reassigned. He was given a prestigious-sounding title with no actual authority, a beautiful office with a phone that never rang. He spent his days staring out the window, the memory of General Wallace's salute seared into his mind. He was a ghost in his own career, a living testament to the danger of assumptions. He was humbled, but more than that, he was changed. He started to listen more than he spoke. He began to look for the quiet ones in the room, the people who focus on the work instead of the credit. He learned, in the most brutal way possible, that the org chart is just a piece of paper, but competence is a weapon. The legend of Evelyn Reed, however, grew into something more. The TACSAT terminal she had used was carefully packed away and sent back to a classified armory at Fort Bragg. But the junior analyst who had watched the whole thing happen, the one who had been paralyzed with fear, took a high-resolution photo of it sitting on the conference table before it was taken away. He printed it, framed it, and hung it by his desk. It wasn't an official award. It was a personal reminder, a symbol. When new analysts would ask about the picture of the old, beat-up piece of military gear, he would lean back in his chair and tell the story. He would describe the panic, the darkness, and the calm, quiet woman who had single-handedly pulled them back from the brink. The story became a teaching tool, a parable about the difference between perceived power and actual capability. The ripple effects of that day were profound and lasting. The company, a massive and unwieldy bureaucracy, underwent a quiet revolution. General Wallace, in his after-action report to the board of directors, dedicated a full section not to the technical failures of the grid, but to the cultural failures within the company. He wrote of the institutional blindness that allowed them to have a national strategic asset sitting in their midst and not only fail to recognize her, but actively mock and dismiss her. His recommendations led to the creation of a new kind of talent acquisition program, one that actively sought out unconventional candidates with verified, real-world experience, regardless of their credentials on paper. They started hiring former non-commissioned officers, retired intelligence analysts, and quiet professionals from a dozen different fields who, like Evelyn, didn't fit the traditional corporate mold. The focus shifted from loud talkers to quiet doers. The culture of rewarding arrogance with promotion began to slowly erode, replaced by a new respect for demonstrated, methodical competence. Marcus Thorne, in his gilded cage of an office, even played a small part. One day, a young, shy data scientist was being berated in a meeting by a new, equally arrogant VP. The young woman had found a flaw in their predictive modeling, but was struggling to articulate it under the executive's aggressive questioning. Thorne, who happened to be observing the meeting, stood up. The room fell silent. He walked to the front, stood beside the young woman, and said, "Let her work. Give her the console, and let her show you." The new VP started to protest, but Thorne just looked at him with the weary, hollowed-out eyes of a man who had made the same mistake and paid a terrible price. The VP fell silent. The young data scientist, given the space and respect to demonstrate her findings, proceeded to save the company from making a billion-dollar mistake. It was a small echo of that day in the dark, a lesson learned and passed on. The legacy wasn't just in the story. It was in the actions it inspired. A year later, Evelyn Reed was gone. She had never been an official employee. Her presence had been part of a clandestine partnership between the company and the Department of Defense, a silent guardianship she provided in exchange for access to their experimental network technology. She left as quietly as she had arrived. There was no farewell party, no gold watch. One day, her desk was simply empty, but her presence remained. The story was now mandatory listening for all new hires in the Strategic Operations Division. The framed photo of the TACSAT terminal hung in the main briefing room, right next to the corporate mission statement. It served as a permanent, silent reminder. Respect is earned through action, not demanded by title. True authority is not the power to give orders, but the ability to solve problems when everyone else is lost. The legend became a part of the institutional DNA, a guiding principle that shaped a new generation of leaders. It taught them to look past the surface, to value precision over volume, and to understand that the most capable person in the room is often the one you notice least. The quiet professional doesn't need the spotlight. Their work, their impact, their legacy, that is their validation. The darkness that had fallen on the city that day had revealed a fundamental truth, not just about the fragility of our infrastructure, but about the nature of strength itself. It isn't found in the polished facade of confidence, but in the quiet, steady hands of those who, when the lights go out, know how to turn them back on. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in your name. It's what continues forward in the quiet competence of those you inspire. It is the enduring, unspoken understanding that the loudest voice in the room is almost always the wrong one to listen to, and that in moments of true crisis, salvation arrives not with a roar, but with the calm, focused silence of a professional at work. The world is full of noise, of people who mistake volume for value and arrogance for authority. We are taught to admire the charismatic speaker, the self-promoter, the one who commands the room with a booming voice and unshakable confidence. But the real work, the hard work, the work that saves us when everything falls apart, is almost always done in silence. It's done by the quiet professionals, the Evelyn Reeds of the world, who have nothing to prove because their skill is self-evident. They don't seek applause, they seek solutions. They don't need validation from the Marcus Thorns of the world, because their validation comes from the successful completion of the mission. They understand a profound truth, that a weapon's effectiveness is not measured by the noise it makes, but by the precision of its impact. Their silence is not emptiness. It is a discipline. It is the calm before the perfect shot, the focus before the flawless execution, the quiet confidence of a master who has honed their craft in crucibles we can only imagine. They're the watchers on the wall, the ghosts in the machine, the steady hands in the storm. They remind us that respect is a currency earned not with words, but with deeds. They're the living embodiment of the idea that what you speaks so loudly, the world has no choice but to eventually listen, even if you never raise your voice above a whisper. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.